No one in the quiet town of Brookdale could ever forget the night a terrified 7-year-old sprinted barefoot into a late-night gas station, crying that his brother was still inside with the man. That single moment shattered the community's sense of safety forever. Hours earlier, their mother, Laura Bennett, had believed she was giving her children the chance at a normal, stable life again. Laura, 35, was gentle, hopeful, and painfully trusting. After a difficult divorce and years of raising her boys alone, Mason, 9, and Toby, 7, she longed for affection and a fresh start. She thought she had found it in Caleb Morgan, a recently released offender she met on a prison pen pal site. Everyone warned her. Caleb's past was violent. His temper unpredictable. His record long. But Laura saw only what he allowed her to see: soft words, handwritten letters full of regret and longing, promises of redemption. She believed in second chances. And she believed in him. Against every bit of advice, she opened her home, and her family, to Caleb. For a short time, he played the part convincingly. He cooked dinner, helped Mason with math homework, even fixed the leaky kitchen sink. Laura convinced herself she had been right. But the boys sensed the truth far sooner than she did. Small things began to feel wrong. Caleb's hand lingered too long on Mason's shoulder. His tone snapped from warm to biting in an instant. He slammed cabinets over the smallest inconveniences. Toby began sleeping with his bedroom light on. Mason watched Caleb warily, noticing every shift in his expression. Laura tried to rationalize it. He's adjusting, she told herself. He's trying. But the unease grew heavier with each passing week. Then came the night that tore everything apart. It was a humid August evening. The four of them were driving home from Laura's sister's house, a short 15-minute trip. The boys were half asleep in the back seat when Caleb suddenly erupted in anger over something Laura said about needing more time before making a long-term commitment. His hand strangled the steering wheel. His voice sharpened into something venomous. The boys sat rigid, eyes wide, breaths shallow. Just minutes later, Caleb jerked the car onto the shoulder of a remote 2-lane road. The night air inside the car thickened, suffocating. Before Laura could react, Caleb turned on her, explosive, unpredictable. He struck her. Hard. Then he yanked the passenger door open and forced her onto the gravel. The boys screamed her name as she fell to her knees. Before she could regain her footing, Caleb slammed the door, his face shadowed in rage. The tires screeched, spitting dust as the car tore away, Laura's children trapped inside with a man whose anger had finally become uncontrollable. Her scream echoed into the darkness, swallowed by the empty stretch of road. Minutes later, bleeding and panicked, Laura was running toward the nearest porch light, desperate for help. But while she pleaded for someone to save her boys, Caleb was already heading toward a small house miles away, a place where fear would turn into something unimaginably worse. The nightmare had only just begun. Caleb didn't say a word as he drove. The car hummed over the dark road, headlights slicing through the thick summer air. In the back seat, Mason held Toby's shaking hand, whispering, it's okay," though he didn't believe it himself. Caleb's jaw clenched, the muscles twitching beneath his skin. Every few seconds, he muttered under his breath, angry fragments, impossible to understand. Mason could feel the danger radiating off him like heat. The boys knew where they were headed long before the house appeared, an old, sagging property Caleb had mentioned once. A place he claimed he used to stay when life got rough. Mason remembered Caleb saying it with a glare that made him shiver even then. The house sat at the very end of a dirt road, swallowed by overgrown weeds. Its porch sagged, one light flickering dimly. When the car stopped, Caleb inhaled sharply, as though trying to steady himself, but it didn't work. "Out," he ordered. Mason and Toby hesitated, but Caleb yanked the driver's door open and glared back at them. "Now." The boys scrambled out. The night was so quiet the cicadas sounded like a distant scream. Caleb shoved them toward the front door and kicked it open, ushering them inside with a force that made Toby stumble. The interior smelled of mildew and old wood. Dust floated in the beams of moonlight slipping through broken blinds. The house felt abandoned, forgotten, except for Caleb's rage, which filled every corner. He slammed the door behind them. "Sit," he said. They obeyed instantly. Caleb paced the room, tugging at his hair, muttering again. His shadow dragged over the walls with each pass. "You too, you ruined everything," he spat. "Your mother, she never listens. She never trusts me. And now she's trying to turn you against me too." Mason swallowed hard. "We're not." "Shut up." The bark of his voice cut through the air like a crack of lightning. Toby whimpered. Mason squeezed his hand tighter. Caleb stormed into the kitchen, metal clattering as he rummaged through drawers. Mason's heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst through his ribs. Then he returned, holding a large knife. Toby's breath hitched. Mason's eyes widened in terror. Caleb pointed the blade at them. "You think she'll run back to her ex? Or the cops?" "No. She'll learn. She'll learn what happens when she pushes me." He was unraveling, each word sharper than the last. Mason felt Toby trembling beside him. Caleb stepped closer. "Stand up." Mason rose slowly, keeping himself between Caleb and his little brother. He didn't know what he was doing, only that he had to protect Toby. Caleb's expression twisted. "So now you're brave? Think you're a little hero?" "Please," Mason said, voice shaking, "we don't want trouble." Caleb lunged. Toby screamed as Mason stumbled backward under the force of the attack. The house erupted into chaos, the scrape of shoes against the floorboards, the sickening thud of bodies colliding, the sharp, frantic breaths of two terrified children. Caleb drove the blade forward. Mason cried out. Toby bolted. Barefoot, blinded by tears, he sprinted across the living room and crashed through the front door into the darkness outside. Crickets roared in his ears. His lungs burned. Branches slapped at his arms as he tore down the dirt road toward the faint glow of a building in the distance. Behind him, the house fell silent for a moment. Then came the sound no child should ever hear. A final, broken cry. Toby didn't look back. He ran until the gravel turned to pavement and fluorescent lights flickered above him. He burst into the all-night convenience store, sobbing so hard he couldn't form full sentences. "Help, my brother, he's still with him, please." The clerk froze, understanding flooding her eyes. She grabbed the phone, dialing emergency services with shaking hands. Somewhere miles away, Laura Bennett was already speeding toward the police station, unaware that the nightmare she feared most had already unfolded. The moment Toby's words spilled out in broken sobs, the gas station clerk felt her stomach drop. She crouched down, steadying him by the shoulders. "Sweetheart, you're safe now. Stay right here with me." She guided him behind the counter as she relayed every detail to the dispatcher: child, injured brother, violent man, remote location. Her voice trembled despite her efforts to sound calm. Within minutes, sirens pierced the quiet night. 2 patrol cars arrived first, then an ambulance. Toby clung to the paramedic who knelt beside him, answering questions between hiccuping breaths. His tiny body shook not just from fear but from the shock of what he had witnessed, or perhaps what he had heard before fleeing into the darkness. Meanwhile, Laura Bennett arrived at the police station in a panic, pounding on the glass doors until an officer rushed out to meet her. Her hair was disheveled, her arms streaked with cuts from her sprint down the roadside earlier. "What happened? Have you found them?" she cried. She was ushered inside, still trembling, where officers worked quickly to make sense of the urgent calls coming in. "Ma'am," an officer said gently, "your younger son has been found." Relief flooded Laura so quickly her knees buckled. She gripped the edge of the counter to stay upright. "And Mason?" she whispered. The officer's expression told her everything she needed to know. There was no update. A convoy of police vehicles raced toward the dirt road Toby had described, scattering gravel as they turned onto the overgrown path. The beams of their headlights cut through the thick darkness, illuminating abandoned sheds, sagging fences, and finally the old house, a warped silhouette against the tree-line. Guns drawn, officers approached the door, which hung slightly crooked on its hinges. Inside, the scene stole the breath from every responder. The air was heavy with a metallic scent. Dust swirled through the flashlight's beams. In the center of the living room lay Mason, still and pale, his small frame crumpled on the worn wooden floor. The knife lay inches away, its handle slick. One officer whispered, "Dear God." The others stood in stunned silence until training forced them back into motion. Paramedics rushed forward, but there was nothing left to save. A wave of grief washed through the room, silent, suffocating. Then came the next realization. Caleb Morgan was gone. A back window had been smashed outward. Footprints in the dirt led into the forest. The night swallowed the trail quickly, but it was enough. A bulletin went out immediately: armed, dangerous, fleeing with no hesitation. The manhunt began. State police, local departments, and highway patrol worked together, sweeping through neighborhoods, setting up roadblocks, alerting nearby counties. Helicopters circled overhead. Laura arrived at the scene an hour later, escorted by officers. They tried to stop her at the threshold, but she pushed past them before anyone could react. Her scream, raw and primal, echoed through the ruined house, a sound none of the officers would ever forget. She collapsed beside Mason, trembling so violently the paramedics had to guide her away before she lost consciousness. Toby, wrapped in a blanket in a patrol car outside, watched through the window as his world shattered. By dawn, the hunt for Caleb stretched across 2 states. Reports streamed in: possible sightings, a truck stolen near a rest stop, a shadowy figure running across a field. None confirmed. But the officers were certain of one thing. Caleb wasn't done running. And he was willing to do anything to stay free. As the sun rose over Brookdale, the search for Caleb Morgan intensified. Officers moved in coordinated waves, sweeping through wooded areas, abandoned sheds, and rural roads. The case had already crossed state lines, alerts were sent to nearby jurisdictions, and patrol cars monitored every major highway exit. Caleb's flight was desperate. He crashed through forests, stumbling over roots, tearing his clothes on thick underbrush. His mind was chaos, fear, rage, and a frantic need to stay ahead of the law. The night had been humid, suffocating. By morning, he was dehydrated and bleeding from the cuts on his arms. But he kept moving. Around noon, authorities received their first solid lead. A trucker reported a man matching Caleb's description hitchhiking near the state border. Minutes later, another caller said someone had forced their way into a remote gas station restroom and washed off what looked like dried blood. It was him. Police converged on the area, helicopters circling overhead. Officers formed a perimeter along Route 14, while K-9 units began tracking from the gas station. Inside the command post, tension crackled in the air. Maps were spread across tables, marked with red circles indicating sightings. Sheriff Daniels stood at the center, listening to updates arriving faster than he could respond. Then came the breakthrough. A state trooper spotted a figure darting into a dense thicket behind an abandoned farmhouse. The man moved erratically, stumbling as though his strength was fading. The trooper radioed in. "I've got visual. Possible suspect fleeing on foot." Within seconds, sirens wailed from every direction. Officers poured toward the field, creating a tightening ring around the property. Caleb, gasping for breath, burst through the back door of the farmhouse and sprinted across the yard. His shoes slipped in the mud, but he pushed himself forward, fueled by adrenaline and the last shards of panic. "Stop! State police!" an officer shouted behind him. Caleb didn't stop. He plunged into a stream, splashing wildly, then scrambled up the opposite bank. Helicopter blades thumped overhead, wind bending the tall grass around him. Dogs barked in the distance. The hunt was seconds from closing. Emerging from the trees, he found himself on a narrow back road. A beat-up sedan rolled toward him, slow, cautious, the driver unaware of the danger walking straight into her lane. Caleb lunged into the road, forcing the car to brake. The woman behind the wheel gasped, fumbling for her phone. "Get out! Get out!" Caleb screamed, grabbing the door handle. But the officers were faster. A dozen voices erupted behind him, "Hands up! Don't move!" Caleb spun around, knife raised, the same blade he had carried from the house, stained, clutched with trembling fingers. For a heartbeat, everything froze. The wind rustled through the trees. The woman locked her doors. Officers held their breath, fingers tight on their triggers. "Drop the weapon," the sheriff commanded. Caleb's chest heaved. His eyes darted wildly, searching for an escape that didn't exist. "Drop it, Caleb," the sheriff repeated. "It's over." For the first time since the night before, Caleb hesitated. His grip faltered. His arm began to shake. Then, it happened all at once. Caleb lunged forward, but the officers surged faster. The knife was kicked from his hand, clattering across the pavement. He was forced to the ground, wrists pulled behind him, his face pressed into the dirt. "It's over," the sheriff said again, this time firmly. For the first time in hours, Brookdale could breathe. Caleb Morgan, exhausted, defeated, growled through his teeth, "She shouldn't have crossed me." But the evil that fueled him had finally been contained. Officers escorted him into the patrol car, locking the door with a final, decisive click. Helicopters peeled away from the scene. The radio crackled with the message the entire region had been waiting for. "Suspect in custody." Laura received the call moments later. She sank to her knees, clutching Toby as tears of grief and relief collided in her chest. Her world was shattered, yet somehow still standing. Caleb could no longer hurt anyone, but the damage he caused could never be undone. Caleb Morgan entered the courthouse under heavy guard, his wrists shackled, his expression eerily calm. Reporters clustered behind yellow tape, microphones extended like reaching hands. The case had spread far beyond Brookdale. People across the state now knew the name of the man who had taken a child's life and terrorized another. The trial began 6 months after Caleb's arrest. For Laura Bennett, the courtroom felt colder than any winter she had lived through. She sat in the front row each day, her hands trembling in her lap, Toby beside her with a therapist always close at hand. Caleb chose to represent himself. That decision alone sent a chill through the jury box. Every time he stood to speak, every time his voice echoed through the courtroom, it seemed like a deliberate attempt to maintain control, to insert himself back into the lives of the people he had shattered. He cross-examined witnesses with unsettling calmness. He stared at Laura longer than he needed to. He questioned details already proven, twisting them, manipulating them, trying to plant doubts where none belonged. But the evidence against him was overwhelming. Crime scene photographs, forensic reports, footprints, the recovered weapon, the blood patterns inside the house, all of it painted a brutal and undeniable picture. But the most powerful testimony came from the one person who had survived him. Toby. Now 8, he took the witness stand with a small stuffed dinosaur tucked into his pocket. His voice was soft, trembling, but clear enough for the courtroom to hear. "He told us it was our fault," Toby said. "He wanted to scare us. Mason, he tried to protect me." A hush fell over the courtroom. Caleb's face remained blank, but for the first time, the veneer cracked ever so slightly, a tightening of the jaw, a narrowing of the eyes. The truth spoken by a child pierced through his cold composure. Laura sobbed quietly, covering her mouth as her son finished his testimony. Next came law enforcement, medical experts, forensic analysts. Every witness added another layer to the prosecution's already ironclad case. When Caleb took the stand, he showed no remorse. He rambled about betrayal, about feeling rejected by a family he believed owed him loyalty. He spoke of control, of anger, of how things got out of hand, but he never apologized. Not once. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the verdict was swift and absolute: guilty of murder. Guilty of kidnapping. Guilty on all counts. Laura held Toby's hand as the judge read the sentence: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Caleb showed no emotion. Not outrage. Not fear. Not regret. He simply stared ahead, as if the world beyond the courtroom no longer concerned him. When he was escorted out, Laura felt a strange sensation, a heavy weight lifting, though her heart still ached with unimaginable loss. Mason was gone. Her life would never look the same. But at least the man responsible would never walk free again. Outside, the community gathered in silence. Candles flickered in the evening breeze. Signs were held with messages like, "Justice for Mason," and "Brookdale Strong." People embraced her. They cried with her. They promised her she wasn't alone. A vigil was held at the elementary school the next night. Mason's teachers shared memories: his bright smile, his love of drawing, the way he always helped classmates who felt left out. Laura listened, clutching Toby to her chest, grateful for every kind word even as each one sliced into her heart. The tragedy sparked broader conversations. Local officials demanded strengthened oversight for released offenders. Community leaders organized safety workshops. Parents held their children tighter. Mason's name became the catalyst for change. But for Laura and Toby, healing was slow. Their home felt emptier, quieter, haunted by memories of a boy taken far too soon. Laura attended therapy. Toby worked with counselors specializing in childhood trauma. They learned to shape their grief into something survivable, something that would not swallow them whole. Life did not return to normal. But slowly, piece by fragile piece, they began rebuilding. The months after the trial passed slowly for Laura and Toby, each day a quiet climb out of the darkness Caleb had forced them into. Grief is not linear. Some mornings Laura felt strong, determined to rebuild her fractured world. Other mornings, she sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at an untouched cup of coffee, hearing echoes of Mason's laughter in the corners of the house. But healing, even in fragile forms, did come. Toby began attending a support group for children who had endured trauma. At first, he spoke very little. He sat in the circle clutching his stuffed dinosaur, listening as other children told stories of pain and recovery. Eventually, Toby found his voice. "My brother protected me," he said during one session. "He was the bravest person I ever knew." The counselor placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He'd be proud of you for surviving." At home, Laura created a small sanctuary for Mason: photos, drawings, and his favorite blue sneakers placed neatly on a shelf. It wasn't a shrine. It was a reminder that his life mattered, that he existed in more than tragedy. Brookdale rallied around them. Neighbors delivered meals. Teachers checked on Toby regularly. Someone planted a tree in the school courtyard with a plaque that read, "In memory of Mason Bennett, may his light guide us toward greater compassion." As the seasons shifted, Laura found herself doing something she never thought possible: smiling again. Not every day, and not without tears, but the smiles came. They came when Toby told a joke. When a sunset painted the sky in soft gold. When she looked at old videos of Mason and remembered the joy instead of the loss. She also found a new purpose. With the support of community leaders, Laura helped establish a program dedicated to educating families about risks, red flags, and resources for those dealing with recently released offenders or domestic instability. She didn't want another parent to make the same mistake she had. She didn't want another child to pay the price. Her voice trembled the first time she spoke publicly about Mason's story, but afterward, she felt something break free inside her. Sharing the truth didn't erase the past, but it transformed her pain into something powerful, something that might protect others. Toby, too, grew stronger. Therapy helped him reclaim his childhood little by little. He drew pictures again. Played soccer again. Laughed again. At night, he still asked if Mason could hear him, and Laura would tuck him in and whisper, "I think he hears everything you say." Years later, Toby would tell people his brother was his hero, a boy who stood up to a monster in the darkest moment. And Laura would always nod, knowing it was true. As for Caleb Morgan, he disappeared behind prison bars, his name fading into case files and cold concrete. He would never again have the freedom to harm anyone. The world outside moved on without him, a world he once tried to control, now entirely out of his reach. But the story did not end with him. It ended with the survivors. Laura carried her grief, but she also carried love. Toby carried scars, but also courage. And Mason, he carried a legacy far bigger than the violence that took his life. His memory became a quiet force in Brookdale, a reminder of what was lost, and what must always be protected. In time, the Bennett home found peace again, not the same peace it once had, but a new one, shaped by resilience. And on quiet evenings, as the sun dipped low and fireflies drifted through the backyard, Laura would close her eyes and breathe, letting the soft warmth wrap around her. For the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of hope. Tragedy stole a little boy's future and reshaped a family forever, but it could not silence the love that remained. In the shadow of unimaginable pain, the Bennetts rose again, proving that even in the darkest chapters of human cruelty, light can survive, not by forgetting, but by remembering, rebuilding, and choosing to carry on.